Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's presentation, 5 Myths of Marijuana in the Workplace. Don't let your dreams go up in smoke. Uh, Everybody here today probably is too young to remember the movie Up in Smoke, famous Cheech and Chong movie. You'll have to go Google it and get a little giggle on that one. But with us today, I'm super excited. We've got Adam Bartram with us today, and he represents management interests in employment and labor law matters. He defends clients in litigation and designs strategic plans and best practices in his work with business owners, executive, and human resource managers. Adam is dedicated to ensuring that his clients understand the rapidly changing employment environment, adhere to the law, and protect themselves at every turn. Now, in this case, I just read directly from the Barnes and Thornburg website, but I have to tell you, Adam's very well known in the community for his work in this area. And when I asked for who should I get to do this, I got a resounding Adam Bartram is who you need to do this presentation for you. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, here's Adam Bartram.
Thanks, Cindy. Camera adjusted. So hey, so Cindy asked me to talk about kind of a growing issue that I'm seeing with my clients in the hiring process and in maintaining their workforce, and that's dealing with issues of marijuana in the workplace. A couple things right off the bat. One is marijuana is still a Schedule II narcotic under federal law, which means it's still illegal to use, possess under federal law. Now, that said, the feds have largely kind of backed out of that space and let states regulate what level of control and regulation they're going to have in regard to recreational use of marijuana. And there's a spectrum. There is, on one end, there's full legalization. So think Vegas, think Oregon, Michigan, or even Illinois. Then you can move over to decriminalization, where it's not fully legal, but you're not going to get prosecuted up to a certain amount. There's medical use, which you've probably heard of. You've heard of medical cards. And then there's this full-on still prohibited, which is where we're at right now in Indiana. And candidly, I don't think, Governor Holcomb's come out and said he has no current plans to legalize. So I don't think that's going to change, at least under the current administration here in the state of Indiana. So in figuring out the way to frame this, thought maybe instead of just giving you kind of the boring do's and don'ts and rules and laws around this, kind of talk about 5 misconceptions that I come across quite a bit in dealing with, representing companies who are dealing with employee issues. So breaking that down into 5 basic myths, and one of them that I hear a lot is employers don't drug test anymore, and that's just not true. Now, I will tell you that some companies will stop drug testing during periods of low unemployment because they need to maintain their workforce. So that happened a little bit in 2019 when unemployment got down below 4%. But by and large, employers are still drug testing, and they're doing it in one of 3 ways. When you first get hired, you can have a pre-hire test. There's reasonable suspicion tests. So if you seem to be impaired, if there's a smell, a company can go say, hey, we've got a reasonable suspicion that you're impaired, go get a test. Or after an accident. So if I'm driving a forklift, if I'm driving a dump truck, I get into an accident, employers, most insurance companies are going to require that you go get a test at that point. So for purposes of you students, the way I would frame this is, think about if you're getting into interview season and you're getting into the hiring season, and you do use marijuana. There's no judgments here. That's not what the point of this conversation is. It's to make you aware. You probably want to taper that off with the expectation that you're probably going to get tested. And the other thing I would say is, keep in mind, just because you pass the first test to get in the door, to get hired, doesn't mean you're in the clear. Because again, your employer can still test you for reasonable suspicion. Your employer can still test you in post-accident testing. So that's the first myth. The second one is, and we heard this a lot when CBD really kind of hit the scene, which was employees were saying, hey, I didn't fail this test because I smoked marijuana. I failed this test because I took CBD. And scientifically, that's just not possible. You can't have the levels of THC needed from legal CBD such that it would trigger a false test. And if you did, it wouldn't be legal CBD. It would be something closer on the spectrum to actual THC in marijuana. So don't try to use that excuse. It's not going to work. Another one that we hear is, hey, if I use marijuana in a state where it's legal, it can't affect my job. And that's not necessarily true either. Even if it's legal in a state, companies can still prohibit employee use. They can still test for it, and you still can't be impaired at work. And I say, keep this in mind when you go to Chicago for the weekend or you go to Vegas for the weekend. And, we have this quite a bit. An employee goes somewhere where it's legal, they come back, they fail a test, and they say, no, where I did it, it was legal. And the reality is that doesn't matter. If you're back in Indiana and it's illegal and the employer prohibits it and you test positive, you're still putting your job in jeopardy. Another one that we hear quite a bit is, hey, if I have a medical marijuana card in a state where it's legal, I can use at work. I can be under the influence at work. And that's not true. You can't be impaired at work, particularly if you're working in a safety sensitive job. Think of this the same way that you can't drink at work. You can't be impaired. Again, particularly if you're in public safety, if you're operating machinery, if you're in the medical field, you just can't be impaired at work. So just because you have a card doesn't mean that, it's now international waters and you can do whatever you want. And then keep in mind, employers can't still test, again, for reasonable suspicion or after an accident. So if one of those things do happen, you'd still be subject to a test in which you would likely fail. And this could be a whole different conversation, but this happens quite a bit too. It's where employee use and social media intersect. So there's this thought that, hey, if I post it on my personal social media page, my employer can't go find it. Or, if when I'm going through the interview process, they can't go look at that. And that's just 100% wrong. There is no such thing as privacy in regard to what you post on social media. There's no insulation out there at all. If it's posted on social media, it's fair game, both for companies when they're looking in the hiring process. And I will tell you, companies absolutely do that. They will go look at any type of public social media because that's going to give them a better idea of the personality and the character fit for any job that you do apply for. So, when we get off this call, go scrub your social media. I can't say that enough. Make sure there's nothing there that you wouldn't feel comfortable showing your grandmother. This goes even for political takes and that sort of thing. Unless you're willing to put it on a t-shirt and wear it out in public, just don't have that on your social media. So as that applies to marijuana use, if you've got a picture of you using or being around it, that can certainly put your job in jeopardy. That can put your chances of being hired in jeopardy. So that's the kind of short and sweet, the 5 myths, that we hear quite a bit in the employment arena, in the employment space. Happy to answer any questions that anyone has on this or on related issues as it comes to marijuana in the hiring process or marijuana in the workplace.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
One of the things you mentioned is reasonable suspicion. So say someone rat thinks somebody out on the anonymous tip line that, hey, I think Joey's, lighting up on weekends. Is that considered reasonable suspicion? That's just kind of like, it was, random. It was.
Sure. So if that was the context of a client of mine and they came forward and they said, hey, Steve said Bill's doing this on the weekend, I'd say that's probably doesn't rise to the level of reasonable suspicion. That's just one employee kind of saying something to somebody else. And if it's off duty, reasonable suspicion has more to do with you're on duty, you're in the workplace, and you appear to be impaired. That's where reasonable suspicion is going to kick in. I can't imagine a company. I mean, that's almost tantamount to a witch hunt, right? And that's usually because Steve and Bill don't get along at work, so one's just trying to cause problems for the other.
Right. So now you mentioned the political issue. Oh, wait, we have a question in the chat. My question about the use of marijuana during legal recreational periods. The person is not on company time and is not under the influence. They only do so on their own recreational time.
Yeah, and I mean, candidly, that happens a lot. And most of the time, the employer's not going to know about it, right? The only time that's really going to pop up, if there is no reasonable suspicion, they don't appear to be impaired at work. Maybe where that comes in is I smoke on a Sunday night, and then I go to work on Monday, and I have a workplace accident. At that point, I'm going to be subject to testing, and it's probably going to trigger. And even though I did it off duty during the weekend, that's not going to matter. And then, then it's up to the employer and how they want to deal with that. Do they just want to discipline, overlook it, or does that arise to the level of termination? And that's going to go to that company's particular drug testing policy. A lot of companies will offer EAP, employee assistance programs, sometimes a last chance agreement, but every company is different. And obviously every industry is different too. It's going to be much more of a deal in something, again, where it's safety sensitive. If you're working in a warehouse driving a forklift, if you're driving that sort of thing.
Okay. We did have another comment getting in, and they wanted to ask about covering the 5 myths again. This is being recorded, guys, so I will be sending this out so you can view his comments. So no worries with that. We'll be able to get it to you. My question was about, you mentioned political. So say I am posting stuff about legalized marijuana in Indiana. What does that do for me? What kind of situation that put me in with work?
Yeah, so that's going to, so keep in mind, you don't have free speech rights from private companies. The idea of free speech only applies to government action. So the state of Indiana can't prosecute me for my political speech. However, if I just work for ABC Corp, strong, and they don't like the fact that I'm posting these political opinions, it's not illegal for them to discipline. It's not illegal for them to terminate me for things that I'm posting on social media. Now, will they? On something that isn't that controversial, likely no. But if you're getting into more free, controversial political elements for a private company, you absolutely could be putting yourself at risk.
Okay. There is a question that says, how should companies handle marijuana use when they have multiple locations and in some states it's legal and some it is not? Do they have separate policies depending upon whether it's legal or not in the state?
That's a great question. Now, keep in mind, the company, regardless of whether it's legal or not, the company can still have their own policy that says, we're going to prohibit it across the board, across all locations. And if you test positive, then you could be subject to discipline. And that's how most companies are handling that. They're not having state-specific issues. What they're saying is, here's our policy across the board, regardless of what the local laws say.
Great. Another question. Can the test distinguish if you have used today or last week?
Yeah, you're putting your finger on one of the key, the difficult issues with testing with marijuana, because it is more difficult to test for that than it is to test for alcohol. So it's not apples to apples. So to the point of that question, yes, you won't have as high of a score if you were smoked as yesterday as opposed to a week ago. But if it's constant use, that keep that testing level up there as well. But that is one of the issues. And I think that's going to be, that's something that employers are struggling with now, because somebody could say, hey, I smoked 2 weeks ago, and then I got into an accident 2 weeks later, so I wasn't impaired. But again, the testing part with marijuana is a challenge for employers.
Oh. I heard rumor when this first became legal about pulling people over when driving. Has they come up with any type of level, or is it just considered if you can't pass a sobriety test? How's that working?
Yeah, no, that's a good question as well. That's something that I think law enforcement struggles with, because it is difficult in these states where it is legal, where I can't, if I wanted to use recreationally, I could, say Michigan. It's difficult to do that testing because it's not as instantaneous and exact as a blood alcohol test. So that's something law enforcement is struggling with as well.
Okay. More questions? If you wouldn't mind, would you just at least name 5 myths again for us?
Sure. Here we'll give you guys the college Cliff Notes version here. I don't even know if Cliff Notes still a thing anymore. I'm dating myself. Employers don't drug test anymore. Not true. They can drug test at pre-hire, at reasonable suspicion of impairment, or after an accident. If I fail a drug test, I can blame CBD. No, you can't. Legal CBD is not going to trigger a false test. If I use marijuana in a state where it's legal, it can't affect my job if I come back here to Indiana. Not true. You're going to be subject to your company's policies and the laws of the state where you're employed. If I have a medical marijuana card, I can be under the influence at work. Again, no, the same way you can't be under the influence of alcohol at work, you can't be under the influence of a narcotic. And if I post pictures of marijuana use or possession on social media, my employer is not going to be able to get to it. Absolutely not true. That's all fair game. Don't post it on social media. Don't post it on social media. Don't post it on social media. Scrub your social media, particularly before you start interviewing and applying for jobs.
I laugh. That you hit the nail on the head with that one. So I do have a question. I was going to ask this, but somebody else did too. Jeffrey did, about random drug testing. What does random mean? Is it really like at any point in time, or is there some kind of rule to that?
There's usually a policy. If companies have random drug testing, they'll say, hey, we're going to drug test 10% of the workforce per month or per quarter, or 25% per year. And then there's a lot of third parties that will run this for them. So the employer isn't the one that's actually making the decision on, hey, you get tested, you don't get tested, you get tested, because they don't want any kind of implication of discrimination or anything so you would work that through a third party, and they just run an algorithm and they say, hey, these 50 people are getting tested in this 6-month period.
And if they do that, is there a window of opportunity? Like, I know I'm going to get tested, you can stop, or which it kind of goes to another question somebody asked about, when the person is not under the influence, is there a limit to the amount in their blood, urine here that employers will deem not acceptable? So it goes to that same kind of thing. It's like, oh, I know I'm going to get random drug tested, so if I just wait, and put pennies in my mouth, I'm not going to test positive.
Yeah, I would say that if it is random, having employees know when it's going to be doesn't make it random. So most employers won't tell the employees when they're going to be doing that testing. Sometimes as a matter of practice, they can figure it out. Every March is usually when it happens, or every June is when it happens. But the employer's job or objective is to make it random. They're not going to tell the employees in advance when it's happening.
Gotcha. Okay. Now, a person can get a DUI if they're drunk in a parked car that isn't even turned on, correct? How does this affect a person consuming marijuana who uses their car as an environment for their marijuana consumption?
Yeah, and listen, I'm not a criminal lawyer, so I think that rule has to, with the DUI, has to do with whether or not you're, in the driver's seat, key in the ignition. I would imagine the same thing applies to a Schedule II narcotic, but again, that's we're out of my realm of expertise at this point. You're gonna have to talk to a criminal lawyer on that.
Okay. Yeah, so trying to figure out, and really and truly, the best, best practice in this is just, if you're going to be working in an environment or in an industry where it's not going to be tolerated, is just get a grip on it and understand that's just something that's not going to be possible, right?
I think you hit the nail on the head. All industries are different. If I work in a creative type, situation, if I work in marketing, maybe, my employer is going to be a little bit more lax, but all companies are different. So I think you hit the nail on the head, which is have a clear expectation of what that company is going to expect from you if you're going to apply and go work there. Now, keep in mind, that's probably not a question you want to ask in the interview process either. Maybe do a little bit of advanced research.
Yeah, yes. And our friend who asked the one question said, well, I guess best practice is no practice.
Right. That's certainly the safest.
Yes, yes. And any other questions? All right. Well, thank you so much, Adam. This was really great. I really appreciate you lending your expertise to our students and helping them understand. I certainly learned something today. Things change so fast in laws, and it's really hard, for us here in Indiana with being kind of surrounded by folks that have varying degrees of, allowing marijuana use, whereas here we're just straight up, it's a big fat no. So thank you so much for answering questions. Last call out. Any other questions? For those of you who joined us just a few minutes late, as soon as the recording is finished up here, I will be sending out the link to the recording, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel. And I want to encourage you, we have another event coming up on February 26th at noon, which is our how to be naturally you in the workplace, dealing with identity and how you bring out your whole self. We have 4 alumni who are going to be with us, who are all people of color, who are going to talk about how that impacts them in the workplace. So we hope you'll join us. And if you have any questions, want to get the link to attend, all you have to do is send an email to careercenter@indianatech.edu, and you can always get in touch with us there. And just FYI, we have 86 days till graduation, students. So if you're a graduating senior, get in to see us so we can help you get prepared. Thanks again, Adam, and thanks everybody for being here.
Thanks all.
Thanks.